Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update. First part there for the 1st of April 2024. This is not an April Fool's, it is me. I am telling you stuff and it will be as accurate as I hope it normally is. I am a little bit late today, a little bit jaded, not so much from any untoward alcohol consumption or anything like that, but just I think the exhaustion of just all this news. Consistently, my brain needed a bit of a rest. I'm now hopefully ready to go. Raring to go. Right. The Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. As ever, all the usual caveats apply to this. You can find them in the description to the video below. I am going to just refer to Thierry, who is a long-time supporter of the channel. And he reached out on Twitter to say that he had calculated some of the stats in terms of the monthly highs and lows, or at least the records for a month. Remember, March has an extra day in it compared to other months. Tanks over March 376, which is a high number comparatively speaking. APC 739, which is very high. Artillery 976 over the month, which is a record after 947 in September last year. So that's a good 30 on top of the previous record. Multiple launch rocket systems is 23, which is actually quite low compared to previous months. Anti-aircraft warfare systems 53 is fairly high. Vehicles and fuel tanks 1,546, which is a new record after 939 in February of this year. And February, of course, has a couple of fewer days, 29 leap year. But even considering as 2 fewer days, 600 extra losses this month. So the vehicles and fuel tanks has been massive this month, and a new record set for special equipment as well. 215 compared to 185, so 30 more than January. So some of these stats have been huge. Let's have a look at the stats for yesterday, the last day of March. 710 personnel. That's there or thereabouts from what we've seen, but we have had our whole range skewed because we've been seeing so many days of over 1,000. Something like 700 seems relatively low in comparison, but actually that's a high number compared to the whole of the war. 20 tanks yesterday is huge, right? And even if you're saying a third of that is propaganda or inaccuracy or whatever, then that's still a huge number, right? There's still sort of 14 tanks. But I think there's some pretty good evidence to suggest they are losing this number of tanks. 17 armored personnel vehicles lost in a single day. 32 artillery systems. That's a phenomenally high number. That's about double the average. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. We have 35 vehicles and fuel tanks and 3 pieces of special equipment. So I think some pretty challenging numbers for the Russians in general. We'll see what Andrew Perpetua has to say in terms of his loss statistics as he accumulates the stats over a 24-hour period. And I had to say that the stats are pretty bad for the Ukrainians. However, the caveat to that is most of these stats appear to be coming from a montage of boats being blown up. So although as bad as that is, that won't have happened yesterday, and that will be just a cache of the video, the cache of imagery suggesting that it's been pretty testy on the Dnipro River. So if you take those boats out, then actually it's sort of a 3-to-1 loss ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses. But of course, those boats need to be factored in at least somewhere into the stats. So they've just been loaded into today's. Right, let's look at the rest of the Ukrainian losses. Now, this is where it gets a little bit of a shame. Some bad news for the Ukrainians in that an S-300 launcher and a Strela 10 short-range air defense system and a long-range air defense system there have been taken out, destroyed by a missile strike and shelling. I've not seen the imagery of the missile strike on the S-300 launcher, but that is obviously a real shame because they are fairly rare and really high value. Electronic warfare system has been damaged as well, and a radar 40 V6M radar tower has been destroyed by a missile strike. So that all of that stuff is high value, problematic losses for the Ukrainians. Then all of these boats sunk or damaged. A number of them damaged. I mean, that's the good news you could get out of that long list of boats, is that they won't all have been sunk. And indeed, for the artillery systems, quite a lot of artillery systems today, but only one destroyed, the rest damaged. Nothing particularly high value in terms of the artillery. In fact, most all of it appears to be old Soviet era stuff. One tank, a Bradley, captured, previously known to be abandoned. So that is not so much that it's a new thing. It's already been counted as abandoned, but now it is in Russian hands. A couple of APCs and whatnot. So yeah, fairly challenging for the Ukrainians here. For the Russians, just a lot of infantry fighting vehicles again, and quite a few bits of artillery, comms tower, artillery, including a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system. A couple of tanks, 4 tanks there, but 3 of them unknown. And then down to that very long list of BMP-1s, BMP-2s, and other infantry fighting vehicles. Just a huge selection of those. And that is justified by, well, it's all justified because every single one of these has the URL of that sends you to the video or imagery that supports these claims. So these are all visually confirmed. But it does justify belief that these stats are at least in the right direction there. A couple of APCs, some trucks, ATVs, and quite a few civilian vehicles as well, which would again support the heavy losses in vehicles and fuel tanks in that category. Then when we look at a few other sources here, we're going to go first to just a claim about, this is from the defense of Ukraine, this is why I decided to point this one out, talking of the Ukrainian success in taking out Russia's Black Sea Fleet in March. The Ukrainians destroyed 1 and damaged 4 more ships this last month. March is a bad month for the Russian Black Sea Fleet, says the defense of Ukraine. So this is their official page in the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. So on March 5th, Magura 5 naval drones attacked the patrol ship Sergei Kotov. The ship suffered damage to the stern, right and left sides. On March 24th, the Ukrainian Air Forces successfully struck Yamal, Azov and Konstantin Olshansky, large landing ships, and reconnaissance ship Ivan Kurs in temporarily occupied Sevastopol. The Russian Black Sea Fleet continues to suffer. Great job by the Ukrainian warriors. What I would like to know is the extent of the damage to these ships and whether they are salvageable at all, whether we can expect to see them in use again in the coming year by the Russians. Right, then there's some more footage of a Jitel R330 Jitel electronic warfare system. These are pretty high value systems, and quite a few of them have been taken out. Truck-mounted electronic warfare jamming communication station taken out by Ukrainians with adjusting artillery fire by a drone to destroy it. You can go and check that out. All of these links should be on, or most of them should be in the description to the video below. Russian, and I talked about this in my live stream last night, the frontline update, where I just noted that there are some really heavy losses for the Russians in a number of different places. This is Tonyenka near Avdiivka, where 36 tanks and 12 BMPs are perhaps the largest number of armoured vehicles used by Russia in one attack since the battles of Avdiivka, in 2024. Ukrainian warriors of the 25th Separate Sishislav Airborne Brigade destroyed and hit 12 tanks and 8 BMPs of the 6th Tank Regiment of the 90th Tank Division of the Russian Armed Forces, which are headed for Ukrainian positions. Incredible success of our defenders' glory. So just a massive array of Russian losses. Just in one picture there, some 20 lost vehicles. Just incredible. And the Russians are losing equipment hand over fist. They are still grinding out those successes, and the question is always, are these losses worth the small territorial gains they are making? The Russians might say yes. Others might say not so much. Just there's a lot of footage coming out of just a whole bunch of equipment being destroyed here. This is Bakhmut. What's interesting about this video is the landscape, actually. Just the pockmarks now filling up with water. Just huge craters all over the landscape in this video. But again, just a number of pieces of equipment destroyed here in the Bakhmut area, showing that the Russians are really struggling in terms of, not losing too many vehicles and humans, right? As the author said, Bakhmut front in the video, an attempt of a Russian assault, 6 AFVs were attacked. only 2 of them survived. So that's 2/3 of the vehicles used in this attack were destroyed. And there is evidence of that there. And then again, this goes back to these figures. And are they somewhat realistic? Yes. There's another. I can't even show you this because just above these 3 vehicles, there's just a mass of dead Russian bodies, just in some circle. It's almost as if a shell had landed in the middle of them and done them all at once. But yeah, you have just lots of destroyed equipment here as well. So plenty of footage for you to get a sense of how expensive it is for the Russians at the moment. But the caveat I always have to add is, well, what are the losses for the Ukrainians like? And we can look at Andrew Perpetual and say, yeah, they have their own challenges. Okay, take out those boats, which again says that how challenging it is on the Dnipro River for those trying to support activity in Krinky or trying to do DRG, Deep Reconnaissance Group, sort of incursions into certain the islands or across the river in certain places on the Dnipro. That is very difficult for the Ukrainians and very dangerous. But yeah, the Ukrainians there losing some high value stuff too. Okay, so moving on. This is what. Okay, I was just trying to remember what this was. So a couple of things here. A claim. So again, this is what Ukraine is doing on a regular basis. These are also considered attacks on positions on our stats. So this is Daniela talking about how drones are being used to attack positions, buildings. Here you can see these, I don't know what they are. They look like large grain silos or something on the other side of the Kherson, on the other side of Dnipro River. But these are attacks not on the silos, but on positions near them that are obviously strategic Russian positions. But look at the size of that explosion. And these are being done with drones. So the point of showing you this is that appears to be an evolution of drone usage such that they are using much, much more significant munitions. If you look at the site, look at that building there, right? Let's get that a little bit bigger. I often don't make these bigger because I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube, etc., etc. But look at the size of that explosion. That's done with this drone that you see previously. That's approaching it there, so we know that's a drone as opposed to an artillery or a missile or something. But if that's done by a single drone, we are in again a slightly new era of drone usage where they are really significant. Here's another one next to the river, really big explosion. So yeah, and that's Ukrainians as opposed to Russians doing that. I can't speak for whether Russians have similar drone capabilities, but that's good news for the time being for the Ukrainians. Of course, whenever one side has an advantage with drones, the other side catches up fairly quickly. And again, talking about big explosions, this is a Solidar district near Bakhmut. In the Donetsk region, arrivals of GLSDB. So these are ground-launched small diameter bombs on Russian positions in the occupied city. So these are those missiles that have been made by Saab and Boeing that are older, dumb. I think they're dumb rockets that are then given the ability to have precision guidance put on them. So they have kits that means that their range is now much greater, 150 kilometers, although here being used relatively close to the front line. But they also have fairly decent explosive capabilities. You can fire them from guided multiple launch rocket systems like the HIMARS, and they are cheaper than the HIMARS general rocket ammunition. So anyway, point being that GLSDB, we've long been waiting for these to be used, and they appear to be being used in greater quantities across the front line on a number of, I would assume, high value positions there. Buildings. Jesus wept. Oh, that's what happens when your fingers don't press the right place, and sorry about that. I just seriously woke up then. So GLSDB is being used. It's my fight with music. It goes on. Anyway, aside from that, a recreation centre is burning in the Krasnodar region. Another example of Russia on fire. In Rostov, the warehouses of the publishing house are on fire. Area of the fire is at least 500 square meters. So I think that appears to be two separate uh, examples of Russia on fire. And then we move on to distance munitions and strikes. Now, I don't think there were. I think it was a relatively quiet night last night. There were a couple of shaheeds thrown in. I think most of them were taken out, but I've got no infographic showing that. So I think it was just quite a quiet night. But Kharkiv is repeatedly being hammered by the Russians. First photos have been released of the scene of tonight's missile attack on Kharkiv. According to Tim White, it's been another tough day for the city in the northeast of Ukraine and no immediate sign of being able to stop this. No casualties, but it seems like a lot of damage. It is being hit by S-300 surface-to-air missiles, or even S-400s, I don't know, used in a ground attack mode, but also glide bombs released from aviation. So it is really struggling at the moment, Kharkiv. Almost all critical infrastructure has already been destroyed in Kharkiv, according to the mayor. He emphasised that the situation for the energy sector in the city is very difficult, according to him. Now, in the city, 1.3 million residents. So far, neither we nor the military see any reason to evacuate Kharkiv. The city has experienced more difficult times. There was a time when 300,000 of almost 2 million people, 2 million of the population, remained. So it's not as bad, maybe, as it was right at the beginning of the war, I think is the implication here, but it is bad. The energy infrastructure has been absolutely hammered, and it is routinely just getting munitions slung into its city confines. Really challenging there. Moving on, Russia at the same time dropped 2 bombs on its own territory. Latest of these FAB bombs, 2 of them, 2 FAB 500s, were found 2 kilometers from the village of Kryukovo. Takes the total of self-bombings to 14 in less than a fortnight. So when I report about certain areas getting hit in Russia, and I sometimes question whether that's actually the Ukrainians or whether it's Russian air defense taking missiles down or rockets down, or whether it's Russians bombing their own places accidentally, there is a lot of evidence of Russia doing this. As Anton Gerashenko says, Astra Telegram channel reports 2 FAB 500s were found 2 kilometers from that village. 14 have fallen, and then he lists where all these 14 have fallen. You know, these are all evidenced, fairly significant Russian bombs falling on their own territory. And then the biggest thing hitting the socials at the moment is the company Uralmashzavod, one of Russia's contributors to the industrial military complex, is on fire. This is in Yekaterinburg, and this is fairly significant. Big old fire there. So I don't know whether this is from a drone strike or whether there's partisan activity there or whatever. In Yekaterinburg in Russia, and Uralmashzavod workshop is reportedly on fire. It's a heavy machine production business. According to the Ministry of Emergency Situations of the Russian Federation, firefighters are working at the scene. According to updated information, the area of the fire on the plant has increased to 4,000 square meters, according to the Ministry of Emergency Situations. It is sizable. This is a kind of strike that Ukraine really need to be doing on a regular basis. If it is indeed a strike or partisan activity or whatever, the US has apparently been upset about Ukraine hitting Russia's crude oil infrastructure and its oil refining infrastructure. They can't be unhappy with Ukraine hammering their industrial military complex, though. No one of the allies will be at all upset about seeing those billowing smoke plumes. Right. Moving on to other bits and pieces, Financial Times reports that over 50% of Russians blame Ukraine for the Moscow terrorist attack, according to the survey. But it's pretty interesting. It's a little more, it's more incredible than that. So more than 50% of Russians believe that the Ukrainian leadership is responsible for the shooting of the Crocus City Hall concert hall outside Moscow, the Financial Times reported, citing a survey by Open Minds, an Anglo-Ukrainian online pollster. So bear that in mind. Around 27% of respondents blame the Islamic State. So you have 100%, 100 Russian people, one assumes, being asked who was responsible for that, on the back of Islamic State saying we did it several times and then producing footage that only they would have access to of their guys doing it. And you've got the intelligence agencies around the world saying, yep, IS did it. And then the knowledge that different agencies warned Russia before it happened that there was an imminent IS attack. And yet still over 50% think that Ukraine did it, and only 27% think that the Islamic State actually did it. So, given all of that knowledge, 27 out of 100 people, only 27 out of 100 people think it was actually IS. Just insane. Another 6% think it's the collective West, so US, UK, and NATO, and over 50% think it was Ukraine, and that's the challenge. And so when Putin and his cronies imply or not imply, explicitly state Ukraine's behind it, who's the audience for those claims? The domestic audience, the Russian population, who then believe this, irrespective of the evidence glaring at them. Starting to look very embarrassing for Russia. So this gets a little worse than that. Not only did the West warn Russia that an IS attack was imminent, even the allied mullah regime in Iran warned that the Afghan Tajik branch of the Islamic State was about to strike. But when you're so deluded as Putin that everything is a Western ploy, this is what happens. Aside from the fact that Russian intelligence agencies only exist to protect the regime, which also means that most of the resources are needed to suppress its own population, Russia attempts to pin this on Ukraine, especially in such a transparently stupid way, should be another signal that you can't reason with Moscow. I broadly agree with that. What I'd wonder is whether Putin really does think it's a Western ploy. So is this Putin's delusion, or is this just calculated psyops to his own domestic population? But you've got Iran apparently warning the Russians as well. Goodness. Right, something that I could have reported the other day. British intelligence in one of their reports said, came out with satellite imagery to show how protected Novorossiysk port is on the Russian coast in the Black Sea. Russia is trying to protect its facilities in a port of Novorossiysk from attacks by Ukraine. A satellite image of the entrance to the port shows that it is now partially blocked by barges to reduce the likelihood of a breach by Ukrainian surface drones. So very difficult to get in there, especially if those barges are moving to allow ships in and out. Anton Gerashchenko talks about this, analysing the images. The intelligence revealed 4 barges located at the entrance to the port. Quote, this is an attempt to strengthen the port's defences against attacks by Ukrainian unmanned surface vehicles, according to British intelligence. A report notes that the Novorossiysk port for Russia now plays a crucial role in sheltering the Black Sea Fleet's most valuable ships. Intelligence recalls the resignation after the defeat of several Russian ships of the Black Sea Fleet commander Viktor Sokolov, who held the post since September 2022. His successor is said to be Sergei Pinchuk. Of course, Sokolov is actually thought to be dead. He resigned or whatever, was pushed aside, but it was thought he was killed in the strike on the headquarters in Sevastopol, going back some time now, and he's not been seen since, and then was replaced. His successor is said to be Sergei Pinchuk, who has served as Chief of Staff of the Black Sea Fleet since 2021. Sergei Pinchuk likely sought to improve the chances of survival of Russian vessels by taking additional preventative and defensive measures, including reducing approaches to port facilities, according to British intelligence. Moving on, the railway which the Russian Federation is building in the occupied territory can be a problem, said the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, Kirilo Budinov. So this is a railway that goes from, if you think of the Black Sea, goodness me, I really should, I suppose, get the map out. Top of the Black Sea, you have the Azov Sea to the northeast of Crimea. So this is my map before I turn it into the Google Earth map. But anyway, you've got the Azov Sea here. You've got Rostov-on-Don and Taganrog, which is kind of staging points for the Russian army inside Russia. But because of the Kerch Bridge becoming so vulnerable, in fact, not being able to transport heavy military goods across that, they're having to use ferries to get it to Crimea. They're building this railway line from Rostov-on-Don to Taganrog to Mariupol to Berdyansk, broadly speaking, down this way, because the existing railway lines come far too close to the front line in Donetsk, such as Volnovakha here, that is particularly vulnerable. It can be hit very easily by HIMARS and whatnot. So they're building this railway line across here that will eventually be able to supply Crimea and the whole of the southern occupied regions there. Well, Budanov admitting that that is a bit of a problem. However, he hinted that Ukrainian military can handle the land part of the railway being built by the occupiers. Quote, "We have experience in this, and it's much easier than the issue of the Crimean Bridge." The thing about the railway being built here is it's much closer than Crimean Bridge. You can hit it much more easily, and you don't really want to hit the railway itself. You want to hit bridges. You can replace railway lines very easily, so it's a waste of time hitting railways with expensive munitions. But it's much more difficult to fix up destroyed bridges. And I don't know, but I would be fairly sure they'd have to use at least some bridges on this railway line going through those regions. But yeah, so anyway, expect at some point going forward the Ukrainians to hit that railway line somewhere. Okay, Andrew Perpetua making reference to the ISW report that a few people have told me I should read. The moment Ukraine has more ammo, it's true, he says, the moment Ukraine has more ammo than Russia, and when Russia is forced to rely on new production vehicles after their stockpiles are exhausted, Russia will be in tremendous trouble. And this then takes us back to these lost statistics, and the question being, how well can the Russians replace those vehicles? Are they refurbishing old stockpiles? And are those vehicles and artillery pieces as good as the ones they're replacing? If they're getting them out of deep storage and they're rust buckets and they're putting a bit of teacut on it and shoving them to the front, there's every reason to think that certainly with artillery pieces they're not going to have as longer range. They would have used the decent barrels up to cannibalize them to replace barrels on the front line. What they're bringing to the front line will be lower quality, and then they'll eventually run out of them. And we're pretty sure that the Russian facilities that are building the replacement vehicles and artillery pieces are not generally building new bits. They're refurbishing old pieces of kit. And then when you look at Yekaterinburg and here a workshop looks like pretty much destroyed or in a lot of trouble, then you go back to thinking actually, yeah, the Russians could be in a long-term decline in terms of their military capabilities, or certainly capacities, once those stockpiles have run out. The ISW then, so let's go and look at the ISW report, or at least their summary of. Russia cannot defeat Ukraine or the West and will likely lose if the West mobilizes its resources to resist the Kremlin, which certainly is happening in Europe and is happening in the US. It's just that they haven't got the aid package through, but actually the facilities, the industrial military complex in the US is ramping up. That the war is unwinnable due to Russia's dominance is a Kremlin information operation and a glimpse into Russia's real strategy and only hope of success. This is precisely what I've been saying for the length of this war, which is that I don't think Russia can win this war. At the most, they can have a stalemate where Ukraine is forced to the negotiating table. But the might of the West against the might of Russia, if Russia doesn't get China to explicitly support them militarily, then Russia cannot win. The Kremlin must get the United States to the sidelines, allowing Russia to fight Ukraine in isolation, and then proceed to Moscow's next targets, which Russia will also seek to isolate. The Kremlin needs the US to choose inaction and embrace the false inevitability that Russia will prevail in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin's center of gravity is in the ability to shape the will and decisions of the West, Ukraine, and Russia itself. This is why the information warfare going on at the moment is of utmost importance, because I think Russia realizes they can't win the war militarily, and I really strongly believe that. But if the rest of the world is supporting Ukraine's own indigenous military industrial complex while having political will to ramp up its own military industrial complex in Europe and in the US, then Russia has to deal with that to win the war, or at least to have a frozen conflict. And to undo that, they can't blow up military industrial facilities around Europe and the US. But what they can do is blow up political support for ramping up of the military industrial complex. So it is information warfare with regard to the European MEP elections in June. the European Union elections. It's trying to support MAGA Trumpism in the US to have a divisive political landscape that is unable to give sustainable aid to Ukraine. Look what's happened. Russia has won in that small area in the last 6 months. We have had a paralyzed Congress where, goodness me, in Reagan's time, that would never have been the case. This is how Russia can not so much win as achieve a stalemate, is by undermining political support for Ukraine. Because when it comes to military support, if the political will is there, Russia simply can't win. And this is exactly what this report appears to say. The strategy that matters most, therefore, is not Moscow's warfighting strategy, but the Kremlin's strategy to cause us to see the world as it wishes us to see it, and make decisions in that Kremlin-generated alternative reality that will allow Russia to win in the real world. Those whose perspective aligns with the Kremlin's are not ipso facto Russian dupes. The Kremlin links genuine sentiment and even some legitimate arguments to Russia's interests in public debate. This is what I've said about amplifying genuine political disputes inside, say, Europe about, for example, immigration. It's not to say that there aren't genuine issues there, but it is also the case that Russia is amplifying one side of that very divisive topic and reaping the rewards, politically speaking. Kremlin is also an equal opportunity manipulator. It targets a full spectrum of those making or informing decisions. It partially succeeds on every side of the political spectrum. Perception manipulation is one of the Kremlin's core capabilities, now unleashed with its full force onto the Western public as the Kremlin's only strategy for winning in Ukraine. That is not a challenge most societies are equipped to contend with. The US has a power to deny Russia its only strategy for success, nevertheless. The US has allowed Russia to play an outsized role in shaping American decision making, but the US has also many sound choices regarding Russia's war in Ukraine. The key successes achieved by Ukraine and its partners in this war have resulted from strategic clarity. Lost opportunities on the battlefield, on the other hand, have resulted from the West's failure to connect ground truths to our interests quickly enough to act. Fortunately, the US faces an easier task in overcoming the Kremlin's manipulations than Russia does in closing the massive gap between Russia's war aims and its capabilities. The US must surge its support to Ukraine, and it must do so in time. So, it can overcome these last 6 months by giving loads when it does actually give aid, if it does, and hopefully it will. Delays come at the cost of Ukrainian lives, increased risk of failure in Ukraine, and the erosion of the US advantage over Russia, granting the Kremlin time to rebuild and develop capabilities that it intends to use against the West, likely on a shorter timeline than the West assesses. The US must defeat Russia's efforts to alter American will and decision-making for reasons that transcend Ukraine. So it's overcoming challenges like Elon Musk and David Sachs, for example, splurging their pro-Russian nonsense and possibly changing the perception of American voters. For the US to deter, win, or help win any future war, US decisions must be timely and connected to our interests, values, and ground truth. But above all, these decisions must be ours, not decisions based on Russian meddling and so on and so forth. Really good stuff from the ISW there, and aligned to exactly what I've been saying. So I'm glad of that validation. The last thing I'm going to say, there's talk in Ukraine about whether Telegram and TikTok may be banned. The head of Ukraine's Parliament Free Speech Committee says Telegram may be blocked if proven that Russia can gain secret information there. If the US bans TikTok, Ukraine will look at reasons and evidence. This is an interesting one. Lots of people have been talking about this over the last week. There is a problem that if Ukraine bans Telegram, there is a lot of useful Ukrainian information that passes through Telegram. Telegram is a very useful tool for Ukrainian units and Ukrainian sources. And I don't think that would end up being a net benefit for Ukraine. I don't use Telegram that much at all, really. But I do know that it is a massive resource for many in the OSINT community. And if Ukraine was to... The challenge is, the issue with Ukraine banning that is it then becomes a whole ecosystem, information space that's pro-Russian. If you say Ukraine can't use it, then Russia owns Telegram. and it can manipulate all of the users on Telegram to a pro-Russian point of view. So I think it would be ill-advised of Ukraine to go down that route. Right, that's enough from me. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.